The novel that became Dune started as a non-fiction article Frank Herbert wanted to write in 1957. The article was about roving sand dunes along a 40-mile stretch of coastal Oregon and the attempts of ecologists to tame them. Today, if you visit the stretch of Oregon and its dunes that fascinated Herbert, you'll find tufts of pale beach grass throughout, and pockets of life in the sand, little groves of pine trees, miniature ecosystems of plant and animal life. These pockets of life and these tufts of poverty grasses were, initially, human additions to the landscape. In the 1950s, this space was roving, destructive, menacing sand dunes whose unpredictable movements could shut down railroads and highways, could destroy forests, and could even threaten water supplies. The difference between then and now was an effort led by a single ecologist, a man Herbert came to know and admire, to plant 300 acres of European beach grass near the Siuslaw River. The article Herbert was working on was to be titled, "They Stopped the Moving Sands." In his research for the article, Herbert charted a single-engine Cessna to fly over the attempt at taming the sands in action. The ecologist was leading a federal team that was planting a barrier of grass at the edge of the sand dunes, one that ultimately worked to create a barrier the dunes couldn't cross. Flying over the work in progress, Herbert saw something more than just the interplay between man and nature. He saw the majestic power of the moving dune, one that would inspire him to imagine such power on a planetary scale. A sand dune is just a kind of fluid, only it takes longer for it to move. It creates waves that, when you see them from the air, are analogous to waves in a sea. Herbert prepared his article, but never succeeded in finding a publisher, which didn't matter much in the long run, since the article became the seed for something much bigger. It became the seed for his most enduring and important work. Our read-through of Dune in this video series has taken us to the point where Baron Harkonnen's plot to kill Duke Leto is executed. Before we get into the execution of that central plot point, let's first take a moment to appreciate what Herbert has done to get us here. For 200 pages, Frank Herbert has teased us about Baron Harkonnen's plot. He has allowed a conspiracy to unfold, slowly. He showed the conspiracy from all sides, explaining it from the Baron's point of view, showing us that the Mentat, Piter, was responsible for the planning of it. He explained how the conspiracy was the driver of the inciting incident of this novel's plot, namely, the move of House Atreides from their comfortable home on Caladan to the harsh world of Arrakis. Herbert showed us that the Duke knows there is a conspiracy afoot to kill him, but he takes his family to Arrakis anyway because he's thinking many steps ahead and would rather step towards the knife he can see than wait for the arrival of a new knife he can't see. Herbert showed us the way the Atreides family functions when whole, the way Paul is on the cusp of adulthood, ready to assume larger responsibilities, but is also fiercely loyal to his father and not yet emotionally ready for the changes that are coming. Herbert showed us that Lady Jessica is cunning and shrewd, that she sacrificed much to give the Duke a son, and that she has passed on these traits to Paul through an intense education in the ways of both the Bene Gesserits and the Mentats. Herbert showed us that the Baron is devoid of ethics, that he is a megalomaniac who is open about his thirst for power and wealth and has a killer's instincts. In preparation for this moment when the plot is unleashed, Herbert has given us Dr. Yue, whose diamond insignia on his forehead means he has received an imperial conditioning which should make him above reproach, but doesn't. Dr. Yue, it turns out, had a single pressure point so sensitive it could override a lifetime of conditioning. That pressure point was his wife, who has been captured by the Harkonnens, enslaved and tortured, and the Baron has agreed to end her torture by killing her once Dr. Yue completes his role in the ensnarement of Duke Leto. And so, with all of this in place, Herbert springs the trap and lets a symphony of intrigue and competing motives play out at once in one of the novel's most memorable sequences. Yue uses his access to Jessica, Paul, and Leto to drug them. He sends Jessica and Paul to be thrown into the deep desert by Harkonnen minions. Yue does this knowing that Jessica and Paul will outwit their captors and escape. Yue wants them to escape. Even as the Baron has convinced Yue to betray the Duke, Yue is double-crossing the Baron. He's arranged to give Paul and Jessica a fighting chance, and he has maneuvered the Duke into a position where he can kill the Baron. While the Duke is down, right before he is turned over to the Baron for gloating, Yue replaces one of the Duke's teeth with a capsule of poison gas. Now we have Leto in the Baron's custody, drugged and weak and disoriented, a secret poison gas tooth inserted in his mouth that he knows, vaguely, he must crack open and breathe into the Baron's face when the Baron gets close. We're waiting and waiting for Herbert to let the Baron get close. It's a maddening scene. Dune is not only the best-selling science fiction novel of all time and a deeply philosophical text dripping in ideas about history, religion, psychology, and complex systems. It is also, when Herbert wants it to be, a marvelously plotted thriller with plot twists on every page. At this point, we've already seen Yue double-cross the Atreides family, and double-cross the Baron during the double-cross. We've watched part of the Baron's plan work with spectacular success, while part of it has failed miserably without the Baron's knowledge. And now we've got Leto in his tooth. And we really don't know what's going to come of it. We've got Leto and the Baron and Piter in the room, and we know Leto is weak and confused enough that he might fail, but desperate enough that he might succeed. Herbert, writing from the Baron's point of view, gives us a fascinating aside while he makes us wait to see what happens. It pained the Baron that this could not be handled privately, just between the two of them. To have others see royalty in such straits, it sets a bad precedent. At this point, the Baron has shown himself to be utterly ruthless, a corrupt, evil, and cunning leader who matched wits with the Duke and won, or seems to have won, at least for now. Despite his success, with this aside, we see the Baron fears for his future. In these thoughts of the Baron, Herbert shows us that life for him is one of constant caution, always looking over his shoulder, always worried that his lieutenants might be plotting to overthrow him, that they might turn out to be just as unethical and ruthless as he is. The aside also gives a subtle reminder to the reader, in a lengthy scene filled with back and forth from multiple points of view, that the Baron and the Duke are not alone in the room. It's a nifty writer's trick that Herbert has pulled with this aside of the Baron's. Herbert is giving needed context and quiet foreshadowing about what's coming. But we can't know that that's its purpose until we get there, when the presence of others in the room, specifically Piter, affects the plot in a significant way. Herbert's fascination with the big picture of this story, with seeing not just the characters in it, but the way their interactions play off each other, the way one character's push leads to another's pull, all of it creating an unpredictable dance with surprising rhythms, matches Herbert's fascination with systems that we see throughout the book. Herbert began writing Dune because he was fascinated with the idea of ecology as a system and wanted to take the excitement he had from watching the movement of sand dunes in Oregon and imagine it on a planet-wide scale. Dune is a novel about complex systems. It's a novel that shows systems of humans at work, plots and counterplots, plans within plans within plans, all of it a microcosm of a larger story playing out on the planet, where spice and sand and Fremen and history and storms and worms are working together. Act 1 of Dune ends with Paul and Jessica escaping into the desert, with the Duke biting on the poison gas tooth to try and kill the Baron, and killing himself in the process. It ends with the Baron escaping, just barely, with Piter dying, with the plot still in motion, but not quite according to the Baron's vision of how it would play out. Act 1 of Dune is a story of intrigue on a human level, and as it comes to an end, through the growth of the character Paul, Dune will expand onto a larger canvas. This novel about complex systems will take what started as a story of human social systems and expand it into a story of planetary ecology, one where human and planet interact. And the human intrigue that drove Act 1 will show itself to be small and petty compared to the larger forces of an entire planet at work. In our next episode, we will continue our read-through of Dune and pay close attention to the rapid transformation of Paul, taking note of how it is the challenges of this harsh planet that make Paul rise to the occasion.